I'm David Hunt, CEO and founder of Hyperion Executive Search and your host for the Leaders in Cleantech podcast. Thanks very much for joining us again. And thank you for everybody who's given us feedback on the new video format. Great if you're joining us there on YouTube. Of course, glad if you're still meeting with us on Apple and elsewhere. One thing I did want to do very quickly, actually, because I do get some great feedback from the audience, and please do keep that coming. Actually, just a quick nod up to Sebastian Fleischhacker, who's one of our long-term fans, whose father is unwell, and he's heading off to Panama to look after him for an operation over the Christmas period. So good luck with all that, Sebastian. In terms of today's episode, really exciting times, obviously right the way across the supply chain and the battery manufacturing space. I'm delighted that my guest this week, Michael Cronley from Ascend Elements, very much central to this circular economy in batteries. So much going on there, which is really, really good news. I hope you enjoy the episode. There's lots to take in. Hello, Mike. It's great to have you on the Leaders in Cleantech podcast.
David, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Super. So there's clearly so much to talk about in and around what Ascend Elements are doing and the whole supply chain battery space, which is very much in the sweet spot of what most of our audience are involved in some way, shape or form. But we always like to get a little bit of a backstory. Mike, you've been a seasoned CEO and business leader for some time, but obviously, and in the battery sector for some time, but relatively recently in terms of joining Ascend. So perhaps you can just give a little bit of a backstory of how you came to join the organization.
Sure. I've been in the automotive industry really my entire career, ever since I graduated with a mechanical engineering degree. So I've been in and around the automotive industry, but the last 12 years or so, I've been in lithium-ion batteries.
Right.
I was previously with a company, A123 Systems, a battery manufacturer based out of the Boston area.
Yep.
And was with them for quite some time, moved through that organization. And my last role there was head of corporate strategy. And that's where we got into a lot of things, but also we made various technology investments.
Right. And
as part of that, we made an investment into, or I was behind the investment into a little small company out of Worcester, Massachusetts. It was called Battery Resources at the time, but now the name is Ascend Elements. Mm-hmm. So this was back in 2017 that I became aware of the company, and it was really on the heels of some joint development work that was going on between A123 Systems and Ascend Elements. And that was where A123 took some cathode material that was made from recycled batteries by Ascend Elements. And A123 took that material, and cathode material is important because it's the most expensive material that goes into a new battery. Well, that material was built into batteries by A123 and tested, and we did it. There was an A to B comparison, and the material performed much, much better than anybody expected, better than the commercial material that A123 was buying and had in production at the time.
Right.
So that had a lot of the technologists really kind of scratching their head at A123. How did this little company make this high-performing cathode material out of spent batteries? And so the technical team dove in, said, yes, the process is really good, it's valid. And then me, being the business guy behind it, came in and essentially led the Series A funding round back in 2017. And that's how I became involved with the company. So I was then sitting on the board of Ascend Elements since 2017. And it was really more or less in stealth mode still at that point. We weren't really public and advertising what it was we were doing. But the technology continued to evolve and get better and better. And then in the 2020 timeframe, I joined the company full-time as CEO. And then we've been on a path of commercialization ever since.
Right. Okay. Interesting, actually. I'm sure I was in Boston in February of 2020, and I met up with some of the A123 people. We're doing some work with Malta, which are also a Boston-based company, so interesting. But that, again, obviously, as soon as I got back from the US, pretty much things were shutting down. So that was an interesting time to be taking over an organization.
Yeah, it was crazy. Actually, my very first week was the week that everything started shutting down in March of 2020. So it's a tough time to launch and come out of stealth mode and go out and start talking to investors about fundraising. Yeah. But we went ahead and we did it. We found some success with some successive fundraising rounds and completed those in 2021 and 2022.
Yeah, no, you've had some great fundraising successes, including Fifth Wall, which Greg Smithies from Fifth Wall has been a guest on the podcast in a not too distant past. And also, you've had some very good successes with some commercial projects and grants from the DOE, which would be good to, we will refer back to that shortly. But in terms of joining the organization, as you say, you joined at a really difficult time with what was going on in the world. But where were you at that point in terms of commercialization? Because again, I guess when people were having to work more remote, were you still very much in the lab stage? Where were you at sort of, I guess, in commercialization from a product and technical point of view at that point?
Yeah, so the company itself moved out of the lab and into a pilot scale operation really in 2018, 2019.
Okay.
So the company had a functioning pilot scale operation that we had engineers, scientists, technicians that were making cathode material, recycling batteries, and extracting the value out of them. Mm-hmm. So that we had an operation that was going in Worcester, Massachusetts. That's really where we were founded. Okay. We're a spin out of Worcester Polytechnic Institute, so that's really our home. And so we had an operating facility there. The pandemic was a bit of a setback, as it was for most all companies. Yeah. But at that point in time, we had to be in the lab, in the pilot scale operation, making materials. And so we did have to do some strange things with off shifts and spreading people out, and still had multiple people in the in the plants, in the pilot plant. But we took a one shift operation, had to spread it across two, just in order to get physical spacing, and just as the rest of the world was trying to figure out how do we deal with this, and how do we still operate and work. But I would say throughout the pandemic, we were largely hands-on. We had to be in the facility, actually making materials and recycling batteries. It wasn't the type of work we do was not conducive to just more or less office work or working from home.
Yeah. Now, there's lots to talk around the specifics of the supply chain. I'm really keen to pick up, because I've heard it from a number of other sources in terms of the actual quality of recycled materials being better than primary source materials, and we'll touch on to that. But just again, for the audience, if you can share a little bit of Ascend Elements, what specifically is it that you do, what do you create, and what's your sort of, I guess, the business model?
Yeah, so there's been a lot said about circular economy, and what does that mean ultimately? So we are essentially applying the circular economy to battery materials. And so fundamentally what we do is we start with a raw material, and our raw material is spent lithium-ion batteries. And so this could come from end-of-life EVs, it could come from end-of-life consumer electronics, cell phones, laptops, power tools, things like that. There's also quite a few batteries that have been deployed out on the electric grid. Mm-hmm. Once those reach end of life, they also come back to us. But we don't necessarily have to wait for the end of life to have a lot of feedstock available. In fact, the largest amount of feedstock for us, or the raw materials that we use, mm-hmm. Actually comes from the large battery gigafactories that are being built up and operating now. Okay. There's a tremendous amount of manufacturing scrap that's available, and that's the largest source of feedstock for us today. Eventually, once the EVs reach their end of life, or batteries that are on the grid reach their end of life, they will come back and need to be recycled. But we take all of that material and we begin to process it, and we process it in a very unique way, a very cost-efficient way, to directly synthesize new cathode active material. And so this is important, and it's a key distinction. Many other recycling companies will take in batteries, these spent batteries, same raw material that we're dealing with, or that we're taking in, and they go through a process and they try to extract out the lithium, or they try to extract out the cobalt or nickel that are in these batteries. We don't do that. We have a slightly different process, or quite a bit different, and our output product is much, much more valuable than these commodity metals that are extracted. Our output material is 3 times the value of just these raw materials. And so because we're making the cathode active material, which is like I mentioned, the most expensive mm-hmm. material that goes into a battery, that's around half the cost of a total battery is just the cathode material. And it's partly because it has these expensive metals in it, lithium, cobalt, nickel, manganese. That's all in the cathode material. And so we use this very inexpensive source of feedstock, spent batteries, and create a very high value material out of it. And we supply that directly back to a battery manufacturer.
Back to battery OEMs. Okay.
So going back to that whole circular economy idea, we essentially work with battery manufacturers and EV manufacturers. So they have a lot of battery material available to them through manufacturing scrap, warranty returns, or even end-of-life batteries. So we work with them, we bring in all of that material, we process it, and then we sell them back material that they can use directly back in their new batteries. Yeah. And so it's not an intermediate, it's material that can go right back into the battery manufacturing plant to be used.
Okay. Thanks for sharing that. It's really interesting, actually, because again, one of the things that, and we work extensively across storage and batteries, is the saying sometimes that there's not enough recycling generally, which to an extent may be true, but equally, batteries are actually lasting far longer than we anticipated in vehicles, and then of course you have the whole second life battery thing, particularly for stationary storage. So all these great applications before a battery is spent. So one of my questions was going to be around, what's the lag time before you actually get some real quality of feedstocks, but you've hit the nail on the head with this idea of the sort of the surpluses, warranty, seconds, and scrap from gigafactories, which didn't obviously immediately spring to mind. But from what you're saying, that's actually the biggest source of feedstocks at the moment.
Yeah, so around 70 to 80% of the material that's available today is from manufacturing scrap. It's not from end-of-life batteries. When we look forward 7 to 8 years from now, that will tend to equal out. But recognize that it seems almost every month there's a new gigafactory that's being announced, or maybe even every couple of weeks there's a new gigafactory that's being announced and starting to be constructed. So there's a lot of new capacity for battery assembly that's happening all across Europe, all across North America, and certainly China is well ahead as far as capacity ahead of Europe and North America. So there's a lot of battery manufacturing capacity globally that is either installed or being installed. And the scrap rates that any one of those plants are putting out, I would say, are relatively high. Relatively high from the scrap rates most people think about.
Right.
And what it's really 8 to 9% is really a world-class scrap rate number. And when I first got into the battery industry, I was shocked at how high that scrap rate number is. And part of it is because of just the fundamental method of making batteries. And when you make batteries, a lot of the electrodes, so being the positive and negative side of the battery, there's these coated foils. And virtually every battery manufacturer and application requires those foils, those electrode foils, to be stamped. So similar to a car body panel where you have a sheet or a roll of steel or aluminum that comes out and you stamp out a body panel, about 40%, depending on the geometry, about 40% of that material goes into the scrap hopper. Right. And that's actually by design. Same thing with batteries. It's not quite that high. And the cutoffs and the stampings are also quite a bit lower, but there's a tremendous amount of material that just comes out of these manufacturing plants that ultimately should be recycled, should be returned back to the battery manufacturer one way or another. And that's where we step in. That's where we take all of that material, process it, and it's our raw material, and process it and provide it right back to the battery manufacturers.
Yeah. So as you said, that approach is somewhat unique, and the most recycling does exactly what you said before. They'll extract the various materials, or metals in particular, and obviously then they commoditize and obviously go back into the marketplace, which in itself is not a bad thing, of course, which is good. But that's a very different approach. Are there anyone else sort of doing this more definite circular process that you're doing?
Yeah, so there are other approaches, and I'll say lithium-ion batteries, like many other materials, are being recycled and they are being returned back to the supply chain in general. It's really a question of how efficient can you do that. And so the state of the art in the industry now, it's being practiced in large scale in Asia, certainly in China, Korea, Japan, is a process called hydrometallurgy. And this is a process where you essentially take in battery material, the scrap batteries that I was talking about, and mechanically shredding them and sieving them. that process alone yields a product that is also referred to as black mass. It's a real technical term, I know. but that black mass is really the anode and cathode powders that are in a battery. And so when you mechanically shred and sieve this material, you are essentially liberating or getting the cathode and anode powders off of these coated foils and sieving them through a mechanical means and just collecting this material. It's a relatively straightforward process. Many companies are doing this. And actually, that is a process many people believe is recycling. Because you take a battery or a battery material and you run it through a process and you're transforming it into something other than a battery. So technically, that's recycling. I think it's more of a question of efficiency and how much value you can extract. This black mass that is the output of this shredding process is something that you cannot put back into a new battery. It needs a lot more refining. And so, yes, it has all of the nickel and cobalt and lithium in it, which is good, and you're able to capture that, but there's more processing that needs to be done there. So what many companies are doing, certainly in large scale in Asia, there's several others that are in North America and Europe that are trying to put this in install capacity to do the next step in the process, this refining step, which is a hydrometallurgical process. Think of it as a chemical process where you take this dry black mass and then you one by one you leach it in acid and then you pull out the various metals, the nickel, and it comes out in the form of nickel sulfate. It comes out in the form of a cobalt sulfate or a lithium carbonate. These are metal salts that essentially you can chemically extract from this black mass. And yes, you're absolutely correct. These are commodities. They can be, as you extract them, you purify them and sell them out into the commodities markets, which they can go, those materials can go back into the battery supply chain. They can go into other applications as well. In fact, the largest consumer of nickel sulfate globally is not lithium-ion batteries, it's stainless steel.
Okay.
And so that's, there's a market for it, and it is needed. So you are recovering these materials and putting it back into the supply chain. When I talk about what we do as a company, we do it very, very efficiently, and we help battery manufacturers, very specifically battery manufacturers, close the loop in this circular economy. So we help them collect the battery materials, the raw materials, and convert them into a material that they use directly. We don't sell it off to another cathode precursor company or a cathode active material company. We sell our output material directly back to a battery company. And so, number one, we're shortening the loop. When you talk about a circular economy, how many companies need to touch that material before it gets returned back to an application? And so, with us, there's only one company that needs to touch that material before we return it back to the supply chain. So that's efficient. But further, this hydro to cathode process that Ascend Elements has developed, that's uniquely ours, and we've patented many different ways. We have an entire patent portfolio around it.
Right.
But that particular process is more capital efficient, more OpEx efficient than this hydrometallurgical process I described. And the output product is higher value and short circuits this extended supply chain and closes that loop really, really tight. So we're able to provide these materials in a very, very efficient way. And when you look at the economics of circular economy, number one, can you technically do it? Yes, it's being done today. But it really becomes down to how efficient are you at doing that? And that's the unique technology, the unique differentiator that Ascend Elements brings to the market.
Right. I mean, it's such an important part of the process. And I'm sure it's something that I read with regards to Ascend Elements, this phrase of urban mining. Because again, we all know that these the electric vehicles are far cleaner than their fossil fuel counterparts. But mining does have some negative consequences, and it's really important when we do have these elements and these materials that we are able to recycle them, particularly things like the cobalt, which obviously is coming from some very challenging places. So that phrase of urban mining and that sort of, so it's not just the fact that there's circular economy in itself, which is of course great, but you're actually offsetting a lot of the need for fresh primary sources of some of these materials, right?
That's exactly what we're doing. So anybody that can recover these materials and reintroduce them back into the supply chain, we are reducing the need for mining. Mm-hmm. What we can just look at different industries as examples that essentially have done this in very efficient ways in the past, and even looking at lead acid batteries. So these are the 12-volt batteries that are in essentially everyone's car and starts their internal combustion engine. It has many other applications as well. But recycling rates of a lead acid battery today are up above 99%. And so still around, and so the main output there is obviously the lead. And so when you look at lead acid batteries, around 90% of all lead acid batteries are from recycled lead. Now we're still mining a little bit of it because there's still growth in the industry, but ultimately that's a technology that's more than 100 years old. So it takes a little while to get an equilibrium of these materials. So that's essentially what we can forecast will also happen with lithium-ion batteries.
Okay,
it's really a growing market right now for all lithium-ion batteries. Depending on the forecast that you look at, it's forecast to grow at a 30% year over year for the next decade plus. And so when you have that type of growth, you cannot supply all of the raw materials that need to go in that without mining. You must have mining in order to do that. But eventually that growth will slow on a year over year basis. And as we're developing, and this is a new business, a new industry of recycling lithium-ion batteries. And yes, we will be offsetting it. And initially the total amount that the entire recycling industry can provide right now is something closer to 5% of total material requirements. But that will increase year over year, and eventually 10 and 20 and 30. And eventually we will get up to the rates of where the lead acid battery industry is already at. And that's really going to be more of a function of how much material has already been extracted out of the ground and processed and put into this, into the market.
Yeah.
What we certainly do not want to do is to have these materials go into a landfill, to extract them, use them once, and then not reintroduce them back into the material supply chain. That's actually the worst thing we can do. Mm-hmm. And for those that have looked at the economics of this business, there's a compelling argument to say that we should never put any battery, any EV battery, into a landfill. No. There's just too much valuable material inside that battery, and the cost to collect it, process it, and put it back in the supply chain is far less than it is to mine these materials out of the ground.
Yeah. There's so many, that in itself, as you say, is an obvious direction of travel, but particularly at the moment when we have, as you touched on before, as you say, a new gigafactory launched or announced at least a few times a month. A lot of talk around supply chains, of course, because there are challenges in supply of many of the materials for batteries and electric vehicles. So with these new factories which are coming on stream, to some extent, as fast as they're growing, you're able to grow in theory because the materials, as they come on stream, they're producing more of this waste material, and you can bring that straight in. So that clearly is a massive opportunity for your scaling. It'd be good to talk about that because I've seen the new factory or the new sites that you've been acquiring, lots of fundraising being done, and also I think to a couple of, as far as I could see, a couple of projects that were funded or some financing from the DOE in terms of to help you scale because of the importance of what you're doing. How has this, all come about in this year? As a CEO, you come into the pandemic, that eases off, and then suddenly you have this 2022 when the market really starts to accelerate.
Yeah. So without question, the market is accelerating, and I think some of the things that happened first is really the growth or the number of announcements of large gigafactories that was being done, and of course everything that's been happening in Europe and also North America that you see, all the new announcements, all of the new investment. This is something that has already happened in China.
Yeah.
So really, with all things lithium-ion battery, it really grew up big and fast in China because of the environment that existed in China. And this is going back, well, almost a decade. But in the 2013-14 timeframe, things were really taking off there. You had consumer acceptance of EVs. You had very favorable policies that existed, and then a lot of incentives and help to enable local Chinese battery manufacturers to grow and scale quickly. There was a lot of incentives and a lot of market demand for EVs in China, and a lot of that initially was government supported. But when you look at it now, China is by far the world's leader in everything to do with batteries, and this is all the way from refining the raw materials to creating the materials that go into batteries, battery assembly, EVs, even the equipment that's used to make EV batteries.
Right.
All of it is done, or the majority of it is done in China.
Yeah.
What you're seeing now is you're seeing a recognition broadly across Europe. You're seeing it, a recognition in North America that, hey, we need to do something similar if we want to have I'll say a domestic or a local battery supply chain here. And this is, I think it's broadly recognized now that this energy transition is happening. The energy transition is happening with in the automotive industry, certainly the replacement of internal combustion engines with electric drivetrains. Even in the electric grid, the transformation of coal and gas facilities to renewables. A lot of times renewables are being placed with very large batteries. So batteries are at the center of that, and two massive industries that are transforming need a lot of batteries.
Yeah.
And so how do you make those? And governments in Europe and also in North America do not want to be reliant upon one country for such a critical component of that transformation. And so you're seeing a lot of favorable policies come out now. Specifically in Europe, there's now requirements for local content. There's requirements for even recycled content in new batteries.
Okay.
And so this is driving a lot of new investment from battery manufacturers, from battery material manufacturers, and even recycling companies. So that whole loop. So a lot of activities happening, and you see a lot of I'll say incentive money, or you see a lot of financial help coming available from the EU. EU was about a year ahead of where North America was at, but recently last year, as part of a bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed November of 2021, that earmarked around $7 billion to help speed the construction of the infrastructure that's needed for lithium-ion batteries in the United States. And then further, some additional legislation was passed just this August in 2022, the Inflation Reduction Act, and that encouraged a lot of, I'll say, local content. Battery manufacturing assembly needed to be done in North America or with a free trade partner, and or the materials that go into that battery also need to be made in North America or with a free trade partner. So they're encouraging a lot of construction and infrastructure to make these batteries and all the battery materials to support the local region. So you see, it's really a globalization of the battery industry that's happening right now.
Yeah. It's kind of a globalization and yet localization as well, obviously in terms of narrowing supply chains and making sure that there aren't the challenges, for example, that we still see now and have done for a while with the chips being fairly much single sourced from one part of the world. So, which all are clearly plays very strongly towards Ascend and obviously contribute to some great investments and that you've had. One thing, if you're able to share, obviously without exposing anything commercially sensitive, but clearly the technology is relatively unique from what you're saying, some really solid patents. In terms of the markets growing and scaling very rapidly. Are there plans to either have Ascend plants in other parts of the world, or would you license the technology to other partners and JV? What's the sort of, given that there is so many opportunities globally, or certainly within North America and Europe, as you mentioned, where we're behind the curve compared to China, as you say. So what's the sort of plan for your international growth and expansion?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. We are focused initially in North America. That's our home. That's where the technology was based. And so we have an operating facility now in Georgia and a new one that has just broke ground in Kentucky.
Right.
But that's where we'll be starting. We also will be making announcements of facilities in Europe as well.
Okay.
So we're going to be focusing on owning and operating facilities in North America and Europe. When it comes to Asia, we already have a very mature market. There are already companies that are bringing in battery material and recycling that and extracting these key metals. So there's already a well-established supply chain there. It's relatively immature in North America and Europe, and so the barriers to entry are lower, and that's why we're focusing on those regions first. But to the extent that we achieve a lot of traction in North America and in Europe, we will also be expanding into Asia. We'll do that with a partner, whether it's through licensing or through some type of joint venture. But it's that's on the radar for us, is to move into Asia eventually.
Now, how does that affect you, Mike, as the CEO of this business? Because, as you say, there's all these things that are the perfect storm in some regards in terms of demand, in terms of the IRA and other sort of acts, as you say, which are pushing things in the right direction. Scaling is challenging at the best of times. When it's hyperscaling, it's really challenging. You've got to physically build stuff, right? So it's not a software platform. So you've got to actually build sites to do this stuff. You've got to build your team, of course, in itself, which is a challenge, as we well know. So how are you coping, or how are you enjoying the challenges of this type of scale up in this new frontier land?
Yeah, so I find it very satisfying. One of the things personally that has been driving me in my career is I've always looked for roles and opportunities that enabled me to build something. Mm-hmm. And whether it was an organization or a plant or a division, that was always something that I was always sought after, because I like that challenge. I like that type of opportunity. When I was presented with this particular opportunity, was the opportunity to really build and shape a company. Mm-hmm. And the hyper growth that you talked about, that's really what we're experiencing right now. So it's not a stepwise function. You have to be comfortable with a certain level of risk when you're moving forward, and you're going to move forward so quickly and so fast. But yes, we need to scale our team, and we have been scaling our team very, very quickly. Yeah, we're scaling our own supply chain with equipment. Our construction teams building these plants. Also, our a business development team that's securing all of this feedstock and all of the offtake contracts. So all of that is happening in parallel. We've consciously decided not to do this in a serial fashion, where we develop a technology and then have that as a check mark, put that in a box. Then we go out and we develop a customer relationship, get the customer excited about what it is we're doing, and then get a contract. And then we go out and raise funding to build a plant. And then after we raise funding, then we go out and build a plant. Mm-hmm. That's more of a serial fashion, and this industry is just moving too fast to do it serially. So we had been developing the technology really since 2012, and only came out of stealth mode really in the 2020 timeframe. So the technology was by far the most mature out of any of those steps. Yeah. But the rest of it, getting the customer traction, finding locations to build plants, and raising funding, all happened simultaneously. And that, because of all of the tailwinds that exist in this market, there's just a lot of excitement around it. And moving forward, like you mentioned, in this parallel fashion is really what's needed to take advantage of this hyper growth in this industry that is really just starting out in North America and in Europe.
Yeah. One of the things, Mike, to be interesting to hear your thoughts on. Again, there are so many people who want to do something meaningful with their careers, who would love to work in the clean technology or the more sustainable environment. And we as search consultants often are working with people already in the sector. But things like what you're doing, touching on a lot of different industries, I guess, enable a lot of people to hopefully join that revolution, whether they've come from construction or manufacturing or production or other sort of non-traditionally clean tech sectors. And automotive, of course, it's making that transition. How have you sort of built the team, and how have you managed to build a culture that was fit for this hyperscaling?
Yeah, so actually we spent a lot of time on culture in the company. So that for me, that's a really critical part because we're hiring people, and we're hiring 5 to 6 people a week now, and we've been doing that for about a year on trying to grow and scale this. So we're hiring people. Some of them are fresh college graduates that really have a whole lot of work experience.
Yeah.
And then we have some very experienced people from adjacent industries, or actually in the battery industry or battery materials industry. They all come from a background that's all varied and different.
Yeah.
So how do you bring in and blend all of those cultures that existed in other companies? And every company has a different culture. So part of building the company was also building the culture. And we talk a lot internally about teamwork and all working together to support one another. I'll say the majority of the people that come to Ascend Elements, they believe in what we're doing. They believe that they want to make a difference in the world. They want to help clean up the environment. They want to help with this energy transition. And so they're already a believer when they walk in the door for their first interview.
Yeah.
I want to be a part of this. But really what sort of cements things is once they meet a bunch of people from Ascend Elements, we talk about teamwork and how we help each other. And it's not in, and I've been in, I'll say toxic organizations where you're under a lot of pressure, you're under hyper growth, and everyone's held to be accountable for their KPIs and their metrics. And then it tends to be a toxic environment where you're pointing fingers at somebody that's not getting their job done or didn't get their job done like they said they were going to get it done. And we fundamentally don't do that. We don't speak like that at Ascend Elements. What we do is we look at what's going on, and yes, we all recognize what the goal or the mission is here. And we are scaling very, very quickly. So there is a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
But we do it in an environment where there's teamwork.
Yeah.
And so I guess maybe it comes from my roots of being involved in a lot of team sports growing up.
Okay.
It's not one person that can get things done. You really need a whole team. And there's no one person at Ascend Elements that's going to be able to accomplish our goals or our missions. It truly is a team. And so when one person is struggling or falling behind, it's not like, hey, you don't point your finger at that person and say, you got to be moving faster. And you start, getting down on them. It's more of an approach of, hey, how can I help you out? I see that you're struggling. I see that you've got some challenges ahead of you. Can I help you hire? Can I help you with some more resources? Yeah. And it's not just myself, it's everybody in the company that recognizes and pitches in wherever the help is needed. Yeah. And in that way, that when I go around to our various sites and I talk to employees, that's a thing that most of our employees find most satisfying and gratifying for being at Ascend Elements.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not easy to achieve, where you have that level of accountability, which of course you need when you're going through this fast growth. Everybody has to pull their weight, right? But equally on the flip side, as you say, it's not micromanaging. It's letting everybody perform to their best and providing the support for them. Do you think your sporting background, and maybe you can touch a little bit on that, or the fact that you came to this role, you've been in industry for a while, a little bit of maturity, shall we say, that has enabled you to help build that culture?
Certainly. So I've been involved in at several different organizations. And so I've had the opportunity to see what works well and what doesn't work well. And so, all the while going through my career in various organizations at different companies has given me some background of what is really the best way and the most effective way to operate as an organization. Yeah. There's a lot written about high performing teams and how those high performing teams really work well together. We trust each other, and that's a big part of it. We trust that each other is going to do what they need to do, and we trust each other that we have each other's back.
Yeah.
And so because of that, people want to come in and they want to do what is needed to do. They will go that extra yard or that extra mile.
Yeah.
To do what needs to be done. They'll come in at 3:00 in the morning when there's a reaction that's going on, and make sure that it will not fail. We have this level of dedication throughout the organization, and it's really, really important to get success in a very rapid fashion. And we've talked about how quickly the market is growing. In order to essentially be part of that and be one of the leaders in the in the market, we have to move very quickly. And it is a high pressure situation, but everyone wants this company to be successful. Our customers, our investors also want this company to be successful. So they are also helping us. So we have partners that are outside the company also that want to see us be successful. And to the extent that, we receive these massive grants from the Department of Energy, the federal government in the United States also wants to see us be successful.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people that are counting on us, a lot of stakeholders that want us to be successful. And so, to me, it's a no-brainer. Let's all work together and to make this happen.
Yeah, I think trust is a critical factor there. And again, we always, as headhunters, we know what are good environments and what not in terms of why people leave organizations. And invariably, it's the lack of trust and that lack of ability to have some autonomy and challenge to get the job done, right? So I think that trust thing is really important. And again, does come out well in sporting environments. Again, because the role is so varied, you've obviously had the fundraising, you've had site acquisition, you've had obviously the technology, whilst it was reasonably mature, evolutions of that, hiring teams, looking at internationalization, partners, all this kind of stuff that's going on. Which parts of your role do you enjoy most, and which do you find most challenging?
So they're all different. I enjoy all aspects of it. So even though I come from a technical background, I do like seeing progress everywhere. So interactions with customers, and seeing that we can essentially solve problems for customers and see that engagement to help them. Seeing manufacturing sites getting built because they're being built right before your eyes.
Yeah.
And you can see something very tangible happening. That's very, very satisfying. It's very satisfying to me to sit down with a new employee and to talk with them about the market, about the company, about our goals and visions, and also what they want to do and accomplish in their own careers. And how do we as a company or an organization help them on their own personal journeys? That is also very, very satisfying. So in all of these areas, I get satisfaction in all of them. And at the end of the day, if we're able to make a little bit of money along the way, that's also pretty satisfying for myself and the investors. So, being someone that has more of a business hat on these days, as opposed to a technical hat. So that's always that's very good and satisfying as well.
Yeah. Now we've touched on, as we all can see, that we're in disruptive industries that are going through exponential growth, and the challenge with the S growth, and you've got this super growth going on, is to that it's going to be quick, it's going to be fast, lots is going to happen, but it's very difficult to predict. So I'm going to put you on the spotlight a little bit, just in terms of how you see, firstly for Ascend Elements, and then perhaps for the broader battery marketplace evolving over the next 2 to 3 year timeline.
Yeah. So these plants and the investments that are being made and have already been announced are already underway. Mm-hmm. We've announced a $1 billion investment in our new plant in Kentucky to take in battery material and make this high value cathode material.
Yeah.
So that's a very large investment for us. But even when you look at the battery manufacturers and the billions that they're investing in every single factory, they're a small factory is several $billion. Larger factories are $5 to $6 billion. Yeah. We see investments being made from other battery material companies as well, cathode material companies, anode material companies, everybody that's supplying into the battery industry. And then on top of that, you see the tremendous investments that the OEMs are making, not only in their battery JVs that they've developed, but also in their own infrastructure and trying to transform their industry. So there's a lot of investment that's going in. And what you'll see over the next 2 to 3 years is some of this investment, and all of that has been announced, or a lot of it has been announced, but all of that is being built and constructed. And so you're going to see a tremendous ramp up in this industry starting up and transforming. So from a hiring perspective, all of this investment, all of these plants that are starting up, they're going to need people. Yep. They're going to need employees. And so this transformation is already happening. We can see it in front of our eyes. All of these new plants are going to need people. And we can't make EVs, we can't make batteries, we can't make battery materials without people. Yeah. And so we will see a shift as part of this energy transition. And they'll be leaving industries that are maybe going by the wayside. There's not a lot of growth in engine and transmission manufacturing, as an example. That's one thing that's going away. But even if you look at the broader energy transition, the people that used to construct coal-fired power plants, that really isn't happening anymore. So those companies, those employees need to transition into something else. Yep. Now maybe they're building and constructing EV plants or EV battery plants. So it is a transition. It's different. We can still use everyone's skill set, right? But it's maybe in a slightly different way or with a different company.
Yeah. It's great that you recognize that. And again, from the last sort of 10 years of my life, it's been helping people on that transition, helping clean tech companies to scale, but also helping individuals to come and play part in that. And to leave, we refer to them as sunset industries, as you say, industries which are in decline. They may not be dead just yet, but they're in decline. So rather come work somewhere where things are a bit more exciting, right?
Well, so I think it's also important to recognize that change is scary for a lot of people. Whether it's the products or the types of car we drive or the jobs that we have, this is part of a transition. It is happening. And I think it's important to recognize as people that are helping facilitate job change through the recruiting industry or even, as an employer, to recognize that, we're seeing and working with people that are going through a change. And it is a little bit scary for them at times. And to help them along, help understand that and help them along through that transition.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, it's been great to hear more about Ascend and the technology that you have and the evolution of the company. It's clearly going to be, as you say, rapidly growing and scaling along with the whole industry over the next 2 or 3 years. Going back to you as a CEO in closing, Mike, again, it's difficult sometimes to get any free time, but are there sort of things you get up to or places that you go to or books you read that are your go-to when you need a little bit of headspace and you need a little bit of inspiration sometimes on the more challenging days?
Yeah, so certainly I love to be outside, running in the better weather outside or staying in shape and in the wintertime snow skiing. Okay, is something I certainly enjoy. And both of those are some good headspace type activities, and I find that it's the vastness of the outdoors helps me open my mind. But even when I'm inside, I've started to take up a bit of meditation. Right. That's also really kind of helped clear my head, clear my mind. So that's a practice that's ongoing. Yeah. But and some days are better than others. But those are all activities that I try to open up my mind. Yeah,
no, absolutely. It sounds ridiculous. You can't find 10 minutes to go and sit and meditate or chill. But I struggle. Again, like you say, it's probably 2 days out of 7 or 3 if I'm lucky. It's a hard thing to get done. But to your point, leading a business is challenging. Or being involved in any of these businesses going through disruption is challenging. And finding a little bit of space to have and getting outside into the wild is clearly a good thing, because that's why a lot of us are doing exactly what we're doing, is to try and protect the environment that we live in.
Yeah.
So it's been really good to hear from you, Mike. We're going to point everybody to the website, which will have details of how they can find out more information about what you're doing. There's some really good stuff showing some of the factories that you're building and some of the technologies. But for now, thanks very much for joining us, and wish you every success for the future.
Thank you, David.